What's up guys, my name is Marc Steiner and today we are going to be talking about the Canon EOS R. Now this is Canon's first full-frame mirrorless and this is their entry body into the mirrorless world. I think this is a very significant step for the company, however I feel like this camera does fall short in many ways. Initially this was supposed to be touted as a 5D Mark IV killer, something possibly even better, but what we're seeing here is that it's somewhere in between the 6D Mark II and the 5D Mark IV in mirrorless form. Now, in terms of video, you're still getting a 1.7 times crop in 4K, which is super unfortunate, and you're limited to 60 frames a second in 1080 compared to Sony's and Nikon's 120 frames per second. This camera also suffers from the same thing that the Z7 and Z6 do, is that they only have one card slot, which I don't understand, but instead of an XQD card slot, they have an SD card slot, which, I mean, if you were to have only one, I would prefer an XQD card slot because of the write speeds, but so be it. I do think that Canon did a very good job with announcing very pro-level glass right off the bat. They have 4 lenses coming out, including a 28-70 f2, which sounds incredible, and a 50 f1.2, which just is mind-blowing, the fact that they're coming out with this right off the bat. They're showing that Canon is a lens-first company, and that is great, and I think that's incredible. It is going to push a lot of people be like, okay, Canon is taking the mirrorless world serious, they have some serious glass, whereas Nikon and Sony, Nikon didn't really announce anything special, but they did give a nice roadmap, and Sony, when they initially started, didn't have much glass either, but that has changed dramatically, and now they have so much good glass at every price point. One of the new things I do love about these Canon lenses is this additional custom ring function, which I think is so cool. It's something that we saw Sony kind of mess with like the custom button function on these lenses, and you're just like, wow, that's a really cool feature that could be mappable to many things. Canon right now I think has it mappable to a couple of things like ISO, shutter, and I feel like it would be beneficial to be able to map it to even more things down the line so that we could see in a firmware update. That would be very cool. But one of the things about these lenses is that Canon is going to continue only offering lens stabilization, not in-body stabilization, which is super unfortunate with their first iteration of a mirrorless camera. That means that only stabilized lenses can be stabilized versus every lens that you put on your camera. Speaking of these lenses, aside from the 4 lenses that Canon announced, they announced 3 different adapters, which I found very intriguing, but I also think is kind of pointless. Like, they have one adapter which I think is super cool that allows you to put ND filters on it, so when you adapt your glass you have an ND filter right at the back, and that's super helpful. But if you're a heavy Canon user, you already have ND filters for all of your lenses anyway, so that just kind of defeats the point of that. I don't know how many people will be buying a more expensive lens mount adapter to have lens filters that they already own. Canon announced 2 other adapters, the EF2R as well as the EF2R with the custom ring that you see on the end of the brand new lenses, which I think is super cool as well. But again, if you're adapting glass, do you really need that kind of functionality in your lenses? I don't know how popular that's going to be. The sensor of this camera is 30 megapixels, so it's using the same sensor as the 5D Mark IV, which is not surprising. It's a very good sensor. However, I think the fact that they're using older parts and they didn't make this camera system a brand new top-of-the-line thing right off the bat is going to make it hard to compete against both Sony and Nikon, especially with what they're offering at that price point. You have the Sony a7 III, you have the Nikon Z6, and those cameras both, I think, spec-wise are better than Canon's. However, I do like certain things on this Canon that just make life easier. For instance, they're the first camera company in a mirrorless world to make sure the shutter protects the sensor when you turn the camera off. That is a no-brainer, and I don't know why no one else has done that yet. That is super frustrating. Another thing I really like is the ergonomics of this camera. It's much more DSLR-like, which for some is very good, and for others you're like, that's still a little bit bulky for a mirrorless camera. But the grip seems very substantial, it looks like a beefy camera, and that was something that Sony struggled with early on. They made their cameras a little bit small, and to be fair, I think they're still small, but it's small in a good way, not necessarily like too small to use properly. Now, ergonomically, I said that I love this camera, but again, this is one of the things that is talking about the in-between between a 6D Mark II and a 5D Mark IV. It doesn't have a joystick on the back, which is such a pain for choosing your autofocus points. And on the topic of autofocus points, Canon says they have like 5,900, and okay, yeah, that's a huge number that blows everything out of the water on paper, but realistically you're not going to be seeing that kind of thing, and being able to select individual points like that is not going to be possible because you're going to have to swipe around on the touchscreen to focus, which is super cool in some instances, But for professionals who want eye autofocus and things like that, that's not helpful. And speaking of eye autofocus, you can only do eye autofocus in single shot, non-continuous mode, which just seems dumb because Sony has had this for so long. Fuji has had this for a while as well now. Eye autofocus is a game-changing focus system, and to have that in a mirrorless camera is so amazing. But to omit an actual functional version of that, it seems like again that Canon is artificially limiting this camera and how much it can actually do, which seems super unfortunate. I hope that in future firmware updates they do fix this, but it's really unfortunate to see that right off the bat, eye autofocus isn't really a usable focusing system. Adding on to the video, there is significant rolling shutter on these cameras, which is super unfortunate, and it's something that a lot of manufacturers struggle with when going into the mirrorless world. Sony struggled with this for a very long time, and they're getting better about it, but even Nikon and Canon, they're both going to have to go through these growing pains to try and make sure that this doesn't happen as bad in the future. Another thing I love about this camera is the fact that it has a fully articulating screen. You can just view yourself with the screen, you can frame things up differently, you can show other people what you're doing, and I think that's such a helpful thing to have, and it is a touchscreen, which is super helpful. So Sony, take note, we all want that in the a7S III and future cameras. Even though this camera does have a fully articulating screen, I don't know how many vloggers are going to be wanting to pick this up because there are no lenses for this yet, and with the 1.7 times crop, you're going to have to be using a super wide angle lens if you want to shoot in 4K, and it just doesn't seem like a lot of people are going to be doing that because it's too much of a pain to do. Moving on to photos, I feel like this camera is much more geared towards photography and less so videography because of the crop and the limitations. So maybe on a future Canon camera we'll see better video, but I think it's also not a good sign showing that your maiden mirrorless camera is already being limited in video technology, because Canon was such a pioneer with the 5D Mark II, it feels like they're falling behind a little bit here. This camera has a 30 megapixel sensor as we mentioned before, but it only shoots 5 frames per second with continuous autofocus and 3 frames per second if you want super accurate continuous autofocus, which I think is super unfortunate. Canon says that it can do 8 frames per second if you lock down focus, and that's a stupid spec to make because no one is going to be shooting like that in the real world. So realistically, you're getting 5 frames out of this thing, which is not the best compared again to what Sony and Nikon are offering. Another thing about this camera is that it's using DSLR batteries. So for people who have those batteries because they own a DSLR already, super helpful. However, we know that mirrorless cameras take much more battery power to function because of the EVF, because of all the functionality that these cameras have. They're sucking a lot more battery life. So these DSLR batteries are only rated for 350 shots on this camera, which seems super low for a camera of that price tag. And again, it just seems like Canon isn't positioning this camera properly. I don't know if it's going to cannibalize their DSLRs like they said they were going to, because they just don't perform on the same level. Overall, I think this is a good first step for Canon into the mirrorless world, and I'm excited to see what they come out with in the near future. However, I don't think this is the camera you should jump ship to because they're still working out the kinks. It's just kind of unfortunate to see how many of these awesome specs that we saw at launch have a lot of these asterisks, and you're like, 5 frames, 8 frames a second if you do absolutely nothing to the camera. It's just like, it's really unfortunate seeing like 4K 1.7 times crop, C-Log external recorder. These things are the little things that are going to push people away from buying into this system right now. But I think one of the most important things, and Canon knows this, is that they have lenses available at launch. And the fact that they have a 51.2 available at launch is super helpful for a lot of people, especially if this is going to be their first camera. They want a nice lens to go along with that. But with those nice lenses comes a very nice price tag, which is unfortunate because I was really hoping that these lenses would come down in price, especially since more and more people are entering the mirrorless world. But these lenses are still very expensive and not many people are going to be able to afford them, especially if they want to buy into this new system. Alright guys, that's it from me. Let me know in the comment section down below, are you going to be buying one of these cameras? Are you going to be comparing it to the Nikon and Sony offerings? Or are you going to be waiting until the second or maybe third generation product until you finally decide to buy one? My name has been Marc Steiner, and I will see you next time.